Welcome back to CinemaScope, where we continue our wild and witty exploration of the most side-splitting subgenres in film history. I'm Andy Nelson, your ever-enthusiastic host, and today we're thrilled to have a special guest join us for a bonus episode dedicated to the uproarious world of screwball comedies. Joining me for this bonus episode is Professor Grégoire Halbout, film professor and author of Hollywood Screwball Comedy 1934 to 1945, Sex, Love, and Democratic Ideas. Bonjour, how are you?
Bonjour, I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to have you, in this bonus episode talking about more screwball comedy, because if there's one thing I learned about watching all of these, you just can't get enough. They're just so much fun. Before we really,
nice to say.
Oh, sorry, what's that?
No, that was nice to hear and say.
Yeah. Before we dig into the movies, let's just kind of talk a little bit about you and your passion for this subgenre of film. How did screwball comedy, how did it kind of like enter your life, and why really has it become kind of this key part of it as you've continued studying and writing about it?
Knowing that I'm French, living in France, it all happened by accident in the 1980s when I was not yet toying with the idea of doing a PhD on Hollywood comedy, but my generation in the late 70s and in the 1980s was very much into old movie, cinema history, and American movies, and it also comes from your parents. And my father was that generation. He was in his early 20s after World War II, and France had been completely, how shall I say, deprived of Hollywood production during the occupation, during the war. Sure, and all those movies arrived. You know, it's the André Bazin also kind of approach, or this school of the Cahiers du Cinéma. And so he was really talking a lot about Citizen Kane and all those movies. And then by accident, on the left bank in Paris, in the Latin Quarter, for those who know Paris a little bit, there was this huge movement of indie movie theaters showing most of the Bergman movies, of course, but also the Hollywood classics. And they would have some special runs of American comedy and screwball comedy, but no one was using the word screwball comedy at that time. And then I think I'd still have all the flyers, and so and then I, little by little, because I was still in between university and before hitting the job market, and I watched as many as I could, and then I realized also that these movies were the same ones as the ones I saw with my grandmother on French national state TV on Sunday afternoons. So you see, it's they were played as a sort of cheap library catalog kind of back catalog movies, and then 2 books or 3 books were published, or I happened to bump into these books. The first 2 ones were from Wes Gehring when I was going to the States rather often, and he wrote those 2 books about screwball comedy. So it helped put a name on a series of film.
Yeah.
And the other one, which completely changed my life, I think, it's a bit tacky to say so, but it has a meaning, was Pursuits of Happiness by Stanley Cavell, which was published, I think, in 1981 and came here across the pond in specialized bookshops around 1985, 1986. And it really, really changed my vision of cinema, also my vision of that genre. And I think Cavell was very important at that time because he paved the way, being a philosopher, and maybe we can talk about his work later on, but being a philosopher, he was really transdisciplinary in his approach of cinema, and that's the essence of film studies. And in those years, film studies were taking off in France. So that was the beginning of it, and then I dropped out.
Oh, okay.
And I started a normal career, which was completely not normal. And I spent more than 25 years with in the media industry and entertainment industry.
Okay.
So, and I've been with I've been with big corporations like Disney or Nickelodeon.
Sure.
But on the ancillary business side, in consumer products, but still,
Okay.
it's this idea of looking at things, the narrative, the storytelling thing. So I would say that mass market storytelling has been my red thread, even before then, 15 years ago, going back to academia when I finished my thesis.
Interesting. It's fascinating how, and then you kind of find your way back into this side of things with studying and writing about it as well. And just, following up on that, the Cavell book that you're talking about, Pursuits of Happiness, that's really about the comedy of remarriage, which is very much a part of kind of screwball comedy. When we, like you said, there's certainly some films that we're going to be talking about today that can certainly fit into that. Now this is a bonus episode. We're going to be talking about some films. Initially, we talked about discussing 5 films. You came to me with 7 options and said, pull out whichever ones you want. And I don't know, maybe it was the easy route. Maybe I just wanted to talk about more of these movies. But I said, let's just do all 7 of them. So here we are discussing 7 screwball comedies. We're going to be talking about Elliott Nugent's Three-Cornered Moon, Tay Garnett's Love is News, George Stevens' Vivacious Lady, Mitchell Leisen's Midnight, Wesley Ruggles' Too Many Husbands, Jack Conway's Love Crazy, and Alfred Hitchcock's Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Little change in pace for Hitchcock coming to that one. Before we dig into the movies proper, I just wanted to get a sense from you, what is it about this particular set of films that drew you to pick them? Because it's, and I know we already had a conversation with some of the big ones like Bringing Up Baby, It Happened One Night, things like that. But what is it about these ones that drew you to them?
Maybe because I'm not talking about them that much these days. So and also, when you tackle such a big genre, because my corpus or the films I've seen is up to something like 140. I mean, from the main period, the classic Hollywood period. But what was very important to me is I was not a film historian or a film scholar at the beginning, and I did a lot of history, political sciences, and I found that what is interesting in a film genre, and especially in America, it's the power of the movies to communicate socially, the social function of movies. And when you address a bunch of films, of course, everybody is talking about the main ones with a kind of authorist approach, and the big names like Hitchcock, Howard Hawks, Preston Sturges, and it's normal because that's the easiest way. And what I found interesting when you try to find a sort of rationale of thread between all those movies is to really look into what are considered the minor ones, or directors that have been considered wrongly, I think, as secondary directors like Tay Garnett or Mitchell Leisen.
Yeah.
And that's what my colleagues, or even the people who talk to me about the book, appreciate, is that it revives all the not B movies. You can't call them B movies necessarily, but movies that are not associated necessarily with a sort of a brand name. And that's something I found interesting, because we're talking mass market here, culture, mainstream culture.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to kind of describe it. These films, I mean, you're right. This list of directors, other than Hitchcock, I don't think, and George Stevens, but I feel like when I think of George Stevens, it's kind of a different direction of George Stevens films. But I don't think that these directors are ones that readily come to mind as like the big name directors that you often think of. But that being said, it's like all of them are bringing interesting things to these films, and they're absolutely still worth checking out. And I think to some extent, it's good to look at some of these lesser known films because, yeah, they might be harder to track down these days, but at the same time, if you get more people watching them and talking about them, hopefully they will, it'll spur studios on to realize that these are ones that should be more accessible via streaming, things like that. So
these guys were very interesting because they're like craftsmen. We've heard so many things about either the hatred of autorism, which today I think is really too much, and also the idea of only a pantheon of authors could be considered. And all these guys did their classes during the silent era, and they were all professionals and experts in one of several areas of movie making, like being chief photographer, like script writing, gagman, and so forth. And this is something that you can trace or track down in unknown or overlooked movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start walking through these. We'll talk about the movies and then a little bit how they fit into screwball comedy. So first up is Three-Cornered Moon from 1933, again directed by Elliott Nugent. The eccentric Rimplegar family finds themselves in a financial predicament when their wealthy mother loses all their money in the stock market crash. The three adult children, Kenneth, Douglas, and Elizabeth, must now navigate their new reality while dealing with their own romantic entanglements and the antics of their mother's new boyfriend, a penniless yet charming writer. As the family struggles to adjust to their changing circumstances, they find themselves in a series of comical situations that challenge their relationships and individual aspirations. Claudette Colbert and Richard Arlen lead an ensemble cast in this early proto-screwball comedy that showcases the genre's trademark wit and absurdity. So, proto-screwball, 1933, this is kind of coming in even before like the films in 1934, like 20th Century and It Happened One Night, that are kind of looked at as the starting place for screwball comedy. So I guess let's start the conversation with this one coming in at 1933 as kind of this, as I said, proto screwball comedy. It's early and it's kind of setting up what we're going to start seeing in these films.
Yes, I find it interesting. Many people, cinema scholars, talk about that movie as a sort of a landmark or a pivotal movie, and I find it interesting. It's a tiny, short little comedy. You can find some very, very nice versions, very well restored. I think like they always did, they took the tapes from the UCLA library or any kind of library, and the digital version is extremely good. And what is fascinating in that movie, that it's like a sort of theatrical comedy, but it's the use of camera movement. It's such a swift movement, tracking shots, using the camera angles. It really gives this kind of future screwball movement to the comedy, which is I watched it again for this conversation, and it's really the first thing that struck me. And the second thing is that it's a crisis, a depression movie, what some other people called the New Deal comedies. So it paves the way to the My Man Godfrey movies. You've touched on that, but also the Lady Eve, Joy of Living, especially through the portrayal of a completely crazy dysfunctional family. Family is a zoo place. And that's what lots of people have said about My Man Godfrey, but that's exactly what is here. So we have already all the ingredients, the components of screwball comedy. You've got this madcap family with a scatterbrained mother, Mary Boland. She's absolutely fantastic. She really brings with her all her stage persona, and she plays like a theater actress, but it's very well. It fits very well into the movie, and she's representing the faulty generation, because that's what the comedy of those days was always trying to project. There is a generation that is responsible for the crisis, and these guys are the parents, not even the grandparents, the parents, which is very, very interesting in terms of genealogy in those movies.
Which you could also, I guess you could also, again, my man Godfrey, same thing with the father in that family.
Yes. Yeah. And the father is hopeless. He's not a sort of bad businessman like Mrs. Rimpelgar in that movie, but he's completely, the family is out of control. So he's the zoo guardian with no clues. and it's very, very comforting, supposedly, for an audience, a middle class audience, to watch those tycoons losing it. So that's part also of the movie magic. It's making situations understandable or acceptable. And then there is the central character, the heroine, which is played by Claudette Colbert, and she has already all the how shall I say, the even the typecasting elements of what she will play afterwards. She's matter of fact, ready to work, because when the family is completely broke because of this stupid three-cornered moon mine in which the mother has invested a tremendous amount of money, she's the first one to go and work in a factory as a factory girl, and then. Well, we're in the context of the post-Me Too movement. And in the movie, sexual harassment is so gross and so obvious. And I thought, okay, I completely missed that when I wrote the book. Completely overlooked it. So it's interesting how the context in which you watch a movie influences your appreciation of it, and it's filmed in a rather kind of a rather medium close up. When this foreman is really crowding Elizabeth, the poor girl, and asking her to meet him after work.
Well, and your point about that is pretty interesting, because I think it speaks to the nature of the comedy element of the story, where Elizabeth, having come from this rich life, she is not going to accept that, right? And so she leaves and is just fine, like, I'll figure something else out. And that's the comedy. That's what we're getting in the screwball comedy. But in the drama story that we're not getting here, she would be somebody who isn't able to just walk away from the job, but may have to stay there and suffer that type of denigration from the foreman, and just live that life. So it's interesting, like, you can see how screwball comedy uses that to kind of put her into a situation that she recognizes as wrong and is able to walk away from. And I think that's an interesting kind of separation that you would find in the different genres.
Right, and it's very limited in time, of course, because it's only a matter of a decade, and there's also a correspondence, a link that could be drawn with Easy Living. And the Jean Arthur character, because she's really, really bullied at work. She works for this association, newspaper, Boy Scout thing, and she's really, really treated very badly. But she also walk away. So they are fierce. They are fierce. Yes. Yeah. Whatever is, or hand across the table with Lombard in it. They're fierce. They want to be independent. Certainly frustrated, but no nonsense. American young women, or young American women. Right. And what else do we have in that movie? Yes, and she says she picks up a professional. He's a doctor. He's their lodger. And she says, I'm fed up with talking. I want facts. I want the real world, which is exactly the propaganda of screwball comedy. And if you look at the sociology of the characters in screwball comedy, the positive heroes are never politicians, bankers, financiers, or yes, businessmen. They're always failures. The right ones are professionals. They are reporters and journalists, doctors,
Scientists,
lawyers,
professors. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and that's already in the in the loop. And money is at the center of the conversation.
Right.
Bad money and good money.
Right. Yeah.
So bad money comes from, how can I say this? Is really simplifying things, but from speculation and Wall Street, for instance. And good money comes from the money you earn or the money you share with others. So that's also all these movies have for a long time, they've been considered, especially in Europe, as a sort of American propaganda, lulling audience into social acceptance. But I think it's more controversial than that. It's the idea that the money you make with your heart and your mind, is the good money because it helps everyone. It helps build the country. It's not only speculation. And I think that's already in that movie. And then there is the thing that, and that's what I'm thinking of Cavell as I speak now, but it's a bit far-fetched. But you already acknowledge the role of the savior couple. The savior couple is the one that is made of this very matter-of-fact, independent, eccentric to a degree girl and her mate, who is a responsible, ethical professional. They represent the renewal, the democratic renewal. So that's the other thing. And then there is this huge gymnastic in the movie. Have you noticed the boys are running all the time? There's heckle, and it's a bit new. It's like taking the slapstick culture into social comedy, and sometimes it's dark comedy because you've got those. Yeah,
they were very much like younger boys put into the bodies of older men or young men, right? Like they sometimes behaved like they were 12 years old or something like that.
But that's what almost all screwball heroes do. We're going to see that in Too Many Husbands.
Right. You start getting that kind of that childish behavior sometimes that plays really well. And, also translates to the idea of like the whole Looney Tunes aspect, that cartoonish aspect that you get with the characters.
And the influence, and cartoons at that time and all that inspiration. And then there's also something else that I found a bit like a Capra-esque, or it's this montage sequence towards the beginning of the movie, which is a bit like a documentary with all those close-ups on signposts and placards like breadline at 2 p.m., no help wanted, I want work, all these very dramatic declarations. So it's also a little bit like in My Man Godfrey or Easy Living or It Happened One Night, in which you can witness these social vignettes throughout the movies, which will disappear, I would say, later on.
Yeah, you start just reveling, I guess, in the fun of the movie, and you're not necessarily getting as much of the social commentary. Let's shift to our next film. This is Love Is News. This film, again, directed by Tay Garnett, 1937. Steve Layton, a newspaper reporter, is assigned to cover the story of Toni Gateson, a wealthy heiress who has just returned from Europe. To get an exclusive interview, Steve resorts to unorthodox methods, leading to a series of misunderstandings and a false engagement announcement. As Steve and Tony navigate the ensuing media frenzy and their own growing attraction, they find themselves embroiled in a comedic battle of wits. Tyrone Power and Loretta Young star in this lively screwball comedy that satirizes the sensationalistic nature of the news industry and the blurred lines between the public and private life. You were just talking about, having reporters as your protagonists. Here we have Steve, the newspaper reporter, who, stoops to some pretty low methods to kind of convince Tony that he is actually not a reporter, but to get this story from her. And then, of course, she turns the tables on him in the most delightful of ways. This was a lot of fun. And, I thought it was interesting because I think here we're seeing the media's obsession with celebrity and also scandals. And I think in some way, I guess you could say, if we're kind of continuing the social commentary, it might not necessarily be about everything going on with the Depression, but it's another angle of commentary that we're looking at as far as how people fawn over celebrity and what reporters will do, essentially tabloid journalism,
How did you find the Loretta Young character, the heiress, the tin can heiress?
I really enjoyed her in the film, and I thought she played it well, and I thought that there's that line where she learns her lesson, I suppose, but at the same time, like I genuinely liked her because of the way that she was, smart to play the media against this reporter, and I enjoyed that element of her character.
Yeah. It's and well, the reason why I suggested that movie is because the reasons are sometimes rather sentimental or emotional. Otherwise, you're not interested in cinema. Is that I love Loretta Young, and I think she's a wonderful comedian, not only actress but comedian. And I highly recommend another one, which is entitled "The Doctor Takes a Wife," where she plays a feminist, and she's absolutely wonderful. The script is has some faults, but from a character perspective and acting technique, she's wonderful. In this film, what is also interesting is this idea of film genre. Comedy is an open and evolving genre, which makes it much more difficult than Western or musicals, for instance. So it's always a matter of tone, inflection, so hence the screwball style, but also what they include in the plot to make it a little bit new, innovative for a very savvy audience, because people would go to the movies 3 times a week in those days, at least in America. So here you've got 2 things. There is this mini cycle of the duo Loretta Young and Tyrone Power by Fox. They played 3 movies in a row in 1937. So you can imagine the production rhythm, and but also the kind of flexibility of that medium. When something's working, clicks, then you make another movie and with the same actors. And the other thing is that it's a very interesting newspaper picture.
Yeah.
And that really was invented by Hollywood, I would say, in that way. So it intersects the newspaper picture with the role of the press, like you said, about intimacy, but also the guardian of democracy, and the battle of the sexes, with this very incongruous pair, which is the inverted fairy tale, because how shall I say, the lower social class one is the man, and the prince is in fact the princess, and she manages the whole story, like you said, turning around or the table. So that's
and you also get the love triangle, essentially. It's not completely a love triangle, but still, George Sanders is in the story as the man she's supposed to be with, right? And that's kind of part of his reason to be kind of pursuing her, to kind of like figure all this out. But the way that she really has no interest in the George Sanders character, I think, is an interesting element that we're getting here, because unlike, something like Bringing Up Baby, where, okay, you could argue that Cary Grant isn't actually interested in his wife, that he, or that the woman that is his fiancée, but they are actually engaged in everything. Like, there is this sense that, they're talking marriage and all of this sort of stuff. Whereas here, I kind of get the sense from the beginning that Loretta Young really has no interest in George Sanders' character.
Well, because it's a screwball comedy, she can't.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
And the guy is typical of these third party who are there to promote the American couple, because the guy is a bloody French and is a bloody aristocrat, so he represents the old world.
Yeah,
everything, and so family money is, and he's broke. He's broke.
Yeah.
So and there had been so many examples of rich heiresses coming over to Europe to help families on the wane, let's say, and make prestigious marriages. But in Hollywood fiction, the old world is something to be completely disregarded. And so it's and he has no moral, of course, because he comes from the old world.
Right.
As opposed to Steve, the journalist, who is so, how shall I say, ethical, pure, reliable under his kind of bullish air. He burns the letters, the intimate letters between the heiress and the count, because he doesn't want his newspaper to use it, and he protects her intimacy. So it's also a very interesting, a little bit black and white, but an interesting way of giving confidence again in the media and the press, because the press and the media were very much at stake in the 1930s. So and also the production code was very, very careful not to how shall I say, not to criticize or to represent in a derogatory way the media. But what I think that is interesting when you take a newspaper picture as an example, just the title, Love is News. So love, which is an intimate topic, becomes public concern. And it's exactly where we stand today. It's this kind of now obsession of individual rights over the collective project, and this idea that individual rights, the individual is something that is prominent in society, and that it's at the basis of the democratic project. This can be debated in all directions, but that's very interesting, and the film is really about publicizing intimacy.
Yeah.
And with all the contradictions, because at the very beginning, when she figures out that he framed her, when he goes on board the plane and he pretends to be somebody else than a journalist, so she decides to retaliate, and she does. And so she announces, she has a sort of press briefing, and she announces to the whole press, except his newspaper. So he's in a big situation with his own chief editor, because he's lost the scoop. She announces that she's going to marry him, and she's going to give him a sort of a dowry. I don't know how to call that. 1 million dowry. So 1 million is outrageous in 1937.
Oh yeah, crazy.
It's a family of four could live on 20,000. No, on 10,000 a year. So
wow. Yeah.
We're really into kind of utopia, and it's all about, so it's this contradiction between, I'm going to make a public freak of you, the journalist, so that you learn your lesson, because she's a public freak and she has no intimacy. And at the same time, all the movie is about publicizing the romance, the correct romance between the incongruous pair, the social blending that they symbolize, the heiress and the virtuous reporter. And all this is going to be witnessed, acknowledged, legitimized by the press. And by a press, like you said, the press, a press that's able to move from a tabloid perspective, this New York Express, into a more thoughtful or respectful medium. And the final sequence rather, is absolutely fascinating, and I highly recommend it. Just the movie, just for the final scene, when she goes to this coffee shop where he regroups with his co-workers,
Right.
friends
Yeah.
from the different newsrooms, and she comes to really tell him that they have to make up, let's say.
Yeah.
And by the way, spoilers must be authorized when you talk movies.
Right.
And she, well, yes, she wants to apologize for what she's done to him. Well, it's complicated. We can't go into all the details. And then he rushes outside of the cafe and starts walking very fast towards, we don't know where. And then she follows him, and there is this absolutely wonderful backwards and lateral tracking shot with very little editing. I think there's only 2 shots for about almost 40, 50 seconds. And then there's the crowd around them, and she's running after him, and she's really telling him that he needs to reconsider her. And they end up in this drugstore where he wants to make a phone call. So they're like goods in the showcase, and they kiss and make up. And everybody outside, all the people on the street, applaud and just rush onto the window to see them to see them closer. And that's exactly what publicity is about, and screwball comedy is about. Love or marriage needs to be negotiated as a accepted compromise, mutual respect, mutual recognition. And then all this kind of informal contract has to take place through a public declaration, which is the case. We're on a New York street, and with a public witnessing.
Right.
Whatever is and that's what happens, for instance, in When Harry Met Sally. The final reconciliation is at New Year's Eve with everybody around in this huge party. So it gets something, a sort of a social acknowledgement, and also the promise that it can happen to everyone watching that scene. So it's very interesting, this intimacy thing. And that's a topic I'm working on today. This contradiction between protecting your intimacy, your privacy, and needing the public gaze to make your intimacy accepted.
Well, and you didn't even mention that that part of the reason that he walks out to go down to that drugstore is so that he can call his editor to kind of announce everything, right? And so that ties exactly into what you were just saying, that's exactly on his mind too, even though we don't necessarily know. Like, they play it like he's walking out in a huff or something like that, but it's really to go call his editor and tell him the good news.
And having the scoop and the front page news, and so everything is well that ends well. But here again, the press is there to it's like a sort of a good fairy, like Stanley Cavell would say. It's the press is like another space, another character. Everything that the couple does, betrayal, making up, everything is echoed by the press, and it's also a form of ellipse in the story, with all these inserts with the front pages, and then in the end, the press is not only an actor but also how can I say, a seal with the printing of the news of the fact that love story on those terms is the right one for a modern society. Well, I'm pushing it a bit here, and that's what is fascinating here. The role of the press, and the press is everywhere in those, and it still is today in rom-com, always.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. In this film, Tyrone Power, Loretta Young, I mean, you said that they had performed in a number of movies together. How often did they end up appearing in screwball comedy? Because I feel like this is the only time I haven't seen as many screwball comedies as probably you have, but I don't feel like they were faces that I'm used to seeing in the screwball comedies. But I loved them here. I thought they were fantastic in it.
He did only those three with her. Screwball, romantic comedy, whatever you want to call them, and then she did a few other ones until the early 40s. She played in there was a murder mystery that was not very funny, but a bit like Something Happening in the Dark. I forgot the name. I should remember that. She also played in The Doctor Takes a Wife, and that's really a screwball comedy with Ray Milland, and she did another couple of them. So she was more like in the sort of typical career of the time, playing in every single genre. But she was more like comedy and melodrama.
I feel like Don Amici, who is the editor, his editor in this, I feel like I see him pop up in these more often. He's very much a face that just, I think, works well for these sorts of stories.
He's like Ralph Bellamy or Edward Arnold. They are the typical supporting characters.
Yeah. And
it's part also of there's quite a lot of typecasting with these guys. And it's also the part of this familiarity, shared culture that the studios, the production shares with the audience. Because you, just like you did or like I did, we recognize that kind of typical character. Oh yes, and that's him again, and that creates this. But we need to be surprised always. So that's.
Well, to the point, like the next film we're talking about, Vivacious Lady, directed by George Stevens. Jimmy Stewart isn't necessarily always somebody who I think of in like this sort of screwball comedy. Like I think of him more in like romantic comedy or kind of westerns, or I mean, he's also in a big variety of films. But screwball comedy, I feel like I haven't seen quite as many of films of him in that particular genre. And maybe I just haven't seen them yet. But this film, Peter Morgan, a botany professor, impulsively marries nightclub singer Francie during a trip to New York. Upon returning home, Peter must find a way to break the news to his conservative family, including his disapproving father, the university president. As Francie tries to win over Peter's family and adapt to the academic world, the couple faces a series of hilarious misunderstandings and cultural clashes. Ginger Rogers and James Stewart deliver charming performances in this delightful screwball comedy that explores the challenges of merging two vastly different worlds. So again, Jimmy Stewart, Ginger Rogers, she is always somebody who I enjoy seeing. I think Bachelor Mother may be my favorite film of hers. Just love that one.
Yeah.
But I had never seen this one before, and it was just incredibly charming, and I loved watching them as a couple. I mean, as far as this film goes, now we're moving into kind of, we talked about like the different roles. The last one we had the reporter. Here we've got the professor. How does this kind of exemplify the world of screwball comedy and the genre's explorations here of class and cultural differences between a professor and a nightclub singer?
It does, but maybe we can maybe go back.
Sure.
No, to that right after what I think is the most important point in the movie. And Billy Wilder used to call that the UFF. You know the expression UFF?
I don't
It's
know
the
that.
unfinished fuck film. So excuse my French, but it's and the fact that it's again a clash of social classes and culture makes it even more vivid, shall I say. It's the idea, and it's all related with the idea of the home, the house. It's rather subtle and interesting. This couple, it's a sex introvert, basically, and screwball comedy is very much about that, which is rather new, to talk about masculine anxieties, and only in that way. No lady character in the genre is how shall I say, they're always oversexed or asking for better sexual satisfaction, like in My Favorite Wife. And so, should we call that a feminist kind of expression? I don't know, because it's before the era of feminism, but it's still very much flirting with the idea of gender equalization. To stay safe and on the safe side.
Yeah.
And then he belongs to academia. His father is the dean of a faculty in a sort of a provincial town, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, right,
So
right.
province, academia, dean, very old-fashioned, representing the past world, the world that we want
Yeah.
to leave, to go forward in a modern kind of America. And she's a
Charles Coburn
showgirl.
is always perfect in that sort of role.
Yeah. Or a crook.
Yeah, oh, you're right.
And then comes Ginger Rogers with her persona, and she's the RKO star.
Yeah.
In terms of comedies. So when you look at the breakdown of stars and studios, she's really with RKO. I can't remember if she had exclusive contracts, but she's mostly working with them. And of course, it's a love at first sight thing, completely unlikely. They married right after the first meeting.
Yeah.
And of course, they take the train to that provincial town or city, and they need to make it, which means consummate the marriage. And the problem here is that there is a double issue. He's a sex introvert, and strangely enough, he works on the reproduction of a certain type of plants. So the sexuality of non-speaking elements on the earth. And he's completely subdued, like his mother, in front of his father, who is a terrorist.
Yeah.
And so it's really an idea of a kind of idea of castration. If we were to use a psychoanalytical kind of glossary, and to become a man, and also to speak, to externalize his desire, and they can't find access to a room because he can't he hasn't the guts to tell his father he's now married with a showgirl, and she's very much like a showgirl with the dyed hair and everything, and she's so very much the all-American girl, and nothing is an obstacle for her. She manages to do everything she wants, and she's very patient, and the more patient she is, the more strange Jimmy Stewart's look. So it's a very much like a sort of binary film and world. It's the world of show business, the city of perdition versus the virtuous botanist. It is the real life of the world versus academia and intellectuals. And Hollywood doesn't like intellectuals, ever. Intellectuals, that means the think tank in Washington around Roosevelt. It means those guys who are not in the action. So that's always something that Hollywood struggles with. So it's the new generation versus the old one, and the father, the son has to kill the father. So basically, and that's at the core of any kind of comedy, the scene X, and they can't consummate because they can't have the room for that. And what is interesting is that this movie it's a George Stevens movie. So George Stevens used to film a lot Ginger Rogers in her musicals, also for RKO. And what is interesting is the question is not anymore when are we going to make it, but where.
Yeah, right. Because she's put up. Since she can't stay with him, she has to stay in this little, it's kind of like a short-term apartment sort of place, but it's only for women. And he's not allowed to go up to her room in particular windows of time. And so,
because there's a signpost on the receptionist's desk that says, "Gentlemen not allowed upstairs after 6 p.m."
Right.
And the receptionist is Franklin Pangborn, who is specialized in those very, very rigid, obnoxious kind of roles. And
he's perfect in it.
Yeah. And here there's a double entendre. And that's the other reason why I suggested that movie, because here Hollywood is really submitted to a rather strict self-censorship system, with all the cleansing or the monitoring of all contents at every stage of the production by the Production Code Administration. Here the movie, so we're in 1938, there's a 4-year, how shall I say, experience build up of how to work with the new administration, so they know what to do about censorship, how to fight, and so forth. And here the film is very reflexive and is calling to the audience's intelligence. And the film says these regulations are stupid. Look, why should they make it after 6 p.m.? And so it's a direct hint to that.
Well, I mean, he even calls the film Vivacious Lady. Like, the title itself is very suggestive right out of the gate.
Exactly. And then it's doubled by another kind of, which is typical of screwball comedies. It's the, do you say fold away bed?
I guess I'm not sure what those are called, but yeah, fold away bed. I think that makes sense.
So he manages to work his way to the conjugal bed, but then there's a huge, and she's waiting for him, eagerly waiting for him. And then there's a huge problem with the door, just like in My Favorite Wife or The Awful Truth at the end of the movie. And so each time there's some wind or the door bangs, then the bed goes down, and there is a risk that the receptionist can hear everything. And so they're never going to make it, because even the bed doesn't work, and it's not ready to welcome them. And that's really, and this movement, which is very it's an innuendo. It's very interesting because we acknowledge in that scene the very how shall I say, the essence of the screwball style, which is how to represent, suggest forbidden desires, acts. So it can be interpreted as a sexual desire, or also more abruptly as a sexual intercourse.
Right, yeah.
That cannot be displayed on screen, of course, not even suggested. And the whole sequence is very, very funny, very well played, with lots of reaction shots, because everyone, Ginger Rogers and Jimmy Stewart, are on each part of a wall, of a partition. So it helps the camera or the editing to really cut into pieces this desire. And and then I lost what I wanted to say. I forgot. And it happens all the time. Yes, and then you you really meet the production code administration's expectations, which is good taste. Good taste.
Mm-hmm.
I think they certainly found, because in the correspondence that I read it between the studio and the PCA, they never mentioned that scene ever. So, and even after the movie was produced, so it means that they certainly found it tasteful enough.
Tasteful enough, yeah.
For the morality of the audience that always needs to be protected and so forth.
Well,
so,
and they were still able to slip in. I mean, you got the innuendo of trains, which often ends up becoming something that they would use when a train goes into a tunnel, for example, in one of these films made during the production code. There's very much the sexual innuendo there. But here you also, at the very end of the film, when they finally have their moment to themselves and they're able to consummate their marriage, you've got the train whistle, but it's like a wolf whistle. It's very much like much more sexualized at the end of the film, and to the point where it's very, very funny. So they still, even there, were able to kind of slip something in that the production code, I guess, also found okay enough.
And it's generally accepted, because, like in Too Many Husbands, because it's at the very end of the movie, so nothing worse can happen, and nothing is shown. Right. So that would be accepted. And also there's the second principle at the end of the movie. It's the compensating moral values, because they are married anyway, and the family has regrouped. This clash between the father and all the rest of the family has been mended. The gap has been bridged, so society can work as a whole. Yeah. Though they are on the run, and this is what Screwball Comedy is about. We're not sure that they will have a home, a kind of classic home. Ever. So that's also these kind of endings with a question mark. Where are they going? We don't know.
Will this end up actually working out? Who knows? But at the moment, everything is fine. Yeah. Let's talk about our next film, Mitchell Leisen's Midnight, which I had heard about because just 1939, big year of Hollywood's great year and all that sort of thing. So I'd heard of this film. I only just watched it for this, and I have to say it was probably my favorite on the list of films that you had picked. I just completely adored this film. In this film, Eve Peabody, a penniless American showgirl stranded in Paris, finds herself caught up in a web of mistaken identities and romantic entanglements when she poses as a Hungarian countess to gain entry into high society. As Eve navigates the luxurious world of the Parisian elite, she becomes involved with a wealthy aristocrat, his wife, and a charming taxi driver, all while trying to maintain her false identity. Claudette Colbert and Don Amici star in this sparkling screwball comedy that showcases the genre's trademark wit, sophistication, and romantic complications. Just a fantastic film. Really loved it. How does this for you work in the world of screwball comedy?
Can I ask you something before
please.
What is it that you liked in particular in that movie?
I think it was the characters and the situation that they find themselves in. When they end up at the aristocratic estate and they're hanging out there. I think there was this element that you end up getting with Eve, along with John Barrymore's character, Georges, as he kind of has worked out this whole deal to kind of have her continue flirting with this guy who is kind of becoming his wife's lover. So, but he's more drawn now to Colbert than Mary Astor, his wife. And so just like that machination that he puts into play, I just found so fun in watching how she just totally sure, I'll absolutely do that. For all this money, why not? And then just the way Don Amici enters the picture and then also kind of continues this game of playing this Hungarian count. I don't know. It was so funny, and just the setup of the story, I think, worked really well with these actors playing it. You say that like you don't like this film as much.
It's a difficult film.
Okay, interesting.
Well, it's difficult because I watched it another time for this conversation, and I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. But I've always struggled with all the. I'm looking for the word. It's very much European vaudeville.
Hmm.
And comedy is a story of fools and liars. So it's all about quid pro quo, mistaken identities, lies, and with some swifts in the situation. Next minute, they're going to pretend that they are another person, like a taxi driver or a baron, and it's very. That's why comedy is difficult to work on, because of the pace, the rhythm, the tempo, and because of the amount of details. But that put aside, I think it's a little jewel.
Yeah.
And it's Mitch Leisen at his best. He really knows what he's doing. Mitch Leisen is certainly one of the kings of Paramount's comedies, I would say. So here we're back into the kind of autorist approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and he had he had a very, if I think this was a book by Wes Gehring. I don't remember if he wrote a book about Claudette Colbert. Did he? Or another author?
I don't know.
But there was a very, very good relationship between Mitch Leisen and Claudette Colbert, and it shows in every kind of movie they do together. And he also was a very good judge of the rhythm of a script and the number of gags, and how turning the table around without any notice.
And we should just mention, I mean, this was Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett's script. So, I mean, it
Exactly.
did have, that sensibility.
But they struggled. They fought. Because
the two
Billy
writers
Wilder,
with Leisen, or who was
the other way around.
Oh, okay.
Because Mitch Leisen had some good experience of screwball comedy in '39 already, and he didn't like the script as being too complicated, too twisty, and so he really amended it a lot, and he included some gags or some funny scenes. But that's rather interesting in terms of relationship and the role of the director. In the supposedly industrial and stereotyped kind of production, the director has always had a very important role. Not saying that the final cut was his, but the tone of the movie, the quality of the movie, the lighting, the rhythm of the script, especially where comedy is concerned, is a director's matter.
Yeah.
And why is it maybe the epitome of screwball comedy? Because it has all the ingredients. So
right, yeah,
it's like the screwball fairy tale. It starts with a meet cute.
Right.
At the railway station in Paris.
Yeah.
Under the water, she is soaked with water. And the symbolism of water in comedy, like this kind of cleansing, changing instrument when you get into a river, when you lose you change your clothes because they are soaked, when you get a bucket of water on the head, it's always a signal of character transformation. And this is what is happening. She is going to be transformed. We have the inverted fairy tale here also, because she's called Eve, but he's eating the apple.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, you don't notice that when you watch the movie the first time. So it's always talking to the subconscious of or the intelligence of the audience. Then you also have the wandering. That's a rom-com trait, but the couple, they don't stroll, but they drive through Paris several times.
Right.
So that's the way the romance unfolds. That's how they get to know each other. That's how they conquer the public space, because their love is going to be a model for everyone. especially as the
to the point where he brings on every other taxi driver in Paris to help track her down, right? Like they kind of control that aspect of the world in this story.
And that's also the idea of the goodness of the, not of the poor, but the goodness of the humble.
Yeah.
People, a little bit like the Capra way, in what's the yes,
yeah.
I
don't know why I totally blank on it. It's a Wonderful Life.
No.
Okay.
1938 with Jimmy Stewart and
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
No. Lionel Barrymore. You can't take
it with you. Yeah.
With the relationship with the neighbors, the community. So it's a bit this kind of a small town, the humble, that is very much promoted by Hollywood, though it's Paris here. Then we have, in terms of screwball style, we have a hint to Crime and Punishment, because this completely wacky judge says that mental cruelty for the divorce, because they take it's a completely crazy situation. The script is really Byzantine, and the judge says no. Mental cruelty here is completely irrelevant. I can't accept that. But there is a very good Albanian law, and he explains that with the proper instrument, a man is allowed to spank his wife for a certain amount of time. So this idea that love, attraction, getting along with one another is also something that is brutal, that needs alteration. And then they take the marriage to court.
Yeah,
which is typical in The Awful Truth. Right. There is this court scene, and court is a public place. So it's the place where they're going to be unmasked in a very complicated way. It's the place where they will have to, both of them, acknowledge that they're in love with the other one.
Right.
And that's one of the rules of romantic comedy. The commitment, engagement needs to be public. Again, intimacy and publicity.
Yeah.
And there is this reconciliation room where the judge sends them. It's unbelievable.
It's such a strange period of time as far as what they required.
Then there is this idea of being unfaithful and love triangle with the evil third man, like the one you mentioned in Love is News, which is this Jacques Picot. Very rich and again bad money, because his family, and he's making tons of money with a very low quality champagne. That's something that the movie emphasizes. It's and then at the end of the day, all is well that ends well, because Mr. Flammarion, who hired the gold digger Claudette Colbert to how shall I say, help him take back his wife by seducing her lover. Everything is
he gets his wife back.
Yes, and with, how can I say, no moral afterthoughts about the fact that she's been playing around for some time, and quite openly. So it's also it's both very moral and immoral. There's also another narrative stereotype. It's faking craziness, faking mental illness. Yeah. They all do that. We'll see that maybe with one of the next movies. It's also the idea that love and screwball love is crazy. That the guy who wrote the article on screwball comedy in the New York Review of Books, he's got the best title ever. I'm so jealous. I should have entitled the books "Fools in Love." I mean, that's exactly what it's about. So if you were to summarize screwball comedy, it's fools in love, and this is what Midnight is about. It's cheating, lying, and being a fool. It's fooling around. Yes, and then there's something that is not specific to midnight, but that is specific to any kind of comedy, even. And I know people don't like when you make comparisons between Hollywood cinema and English theater or French theater, but it's very much the 18th century French theater, when you wear a mask, and through the masks, lovers can immediately recognize the truth of the other, and it's like the recognition of both hearts together through the mask. So that's typical of the, and which is here what happens, because she decides on an impulsion that she is Eve Cherney when she's about to be caught the first night at the reception, where she's slipped.
Which is the taxi driver's last name, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And when he realizes that she's taken his name, he says, "It must be your unconscious."
Yeah, you love me. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so it's both very coded, very complicated to see through, and completely obvious, and that's what is about the mask. And the mask is a figure that is always used in those very challenged, troubled times, dark times, like here the 1930s and the Depression, and where people had to move into other areas, reinvent themselves, and it's nothing but about America reinventing itself, I think.
Yeah.
If you agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of kind of looking at it at this particular point in time, with a view of these people trying to, create new versions of themselves, right? And is it for the money, or will it be for love? And that kind of ends up being the final crux of the film, which is...
But the money is always in it, because together they will make money, good money.
Well, yeah, and she also walked off with quite a bit of money after helping, Georges get his wife back. So, they'll certainly have some money.
And again, she's American.
Yeah.
And she's the one who leads the whole thing. She's the one who is no nonsense. She's the one who is adaptable. She can play roles, and she's much, much better than the French or the Hungarian. So,
well, and like you said, this is very much a fairy tale. I mean, it's patterned after Cinderella in many aspects. The midnight,
also.
that whole thing. And so, of course, she's going to end up that way.
And for those who haven't watched the film, it's John Barrymore as the Good Fairy is absolutely he cracks me up each time.
Yeah, he's so good in it. It's just a great movie. Let's shift gears to 1940s Too Many Husbands, directed by Wesley Ruggles. Vicki Lowndes' first husband, Bill Cardew, is presumed dead after a boating accident. After a year of mourning, Vicki marries Bill's best friend and business partner, Harry Lowndes. However, Bill unexpectedly returns, very much alive, leading to a comedic love triangle as the two men compete for Vicki's affections. As Vicki struggles to choose between her two husbands, the trio find themselves in a series of hilarious situations that test their friendship and love. Jean Arthur, Fred MacMurray, and Melvin Douglas star in this delightful screwball comedy that explores the complications of marriage and their enduring power of love. This is, kind of a flip of My Favorite Wife, which I thought was kind of fun to see. We, in that film, it's Cary Grant who has two wives, and here we have Jean Arthur who has two husbands. But the stories play in different ways, and I thought that was kind of interesting to see how, in this particular case, it's really about her trying to figure out, like, which one of you do I want to stay with, And I thought that was actually kind of a fun twist on the story that definitely feels different than than My Favorite Wife. This film, again, we're in the love triangle, subverting traditional romantic relationships. How does this kind of like end up fitting into screwball comedy for you?
Because it's a scandal institutionalized.
Yeah.
And breaking the law, being made public. Basically, she finds out that she will have to deal with two husbands. She's had the opportunity to try another man while the first one was supposedly killed in a shipwreck. And by the way, a World War I veteran hero.
Yeah.
So also the nation, etc. And then she decides that she's going to keep both. And that bigamy is the best solution for her. So this is absolutely asocial.
Yeah.
It is something that is forbidden everywhere in all Western civilizations. So, but it's the opposite of My Favorite Wife, which I struggled a lot with, because I was trying, if I may go back to My Favorite Wife just for a second,
Sure. Yeah.
because I was really trying when I read all the, or went through, scanned through all the production papers, the Paramount production papers, I thought I would find some comments about the characterization of Cary Grant. And Cary Grant is very much, it's so he cross dresses. He is completely introvert. He doesn't manage to consummate the new marriage at the moment when the first wife is coming back from another shipwreck, because everyone gets into shipwrecks
It was the
at
period.
that time.
Yeah.
And so he's very much into a sort of is he into women or not? What happened with the first one? Why did she leave? And then why is there this second partner, Randolph Scott, who is there and who says that in the jungle, the law of the jungle is that you don't need to do a contract or go to court to sleep with your wife or your mate. You just grab her and proceed. So that's what he says during the so Too Many Husbands is the opposite. It's strong, highly sexualized, not sexualized, sexed woman who has, like Jean Arthur, the perfect, the little all-American girl, all-American woman, who in fact has a very, very strong character and finds out that she needs two husbands and that the law is not fitted to her life project.
She just loves them both. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the whole movie is about, and the approval process with the PCA was an agony, because they were deleting every single acting indication or every scene indication or dialogue, and they were very careful that it also plays with the spaces, because it's in her house. There is her bedroom and the guest's bedroom.
Yeah.
And so she ends up putting the two rivals like children in those twin beds, twin bed bedroom.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she puts them to bed, and she tucks them up, and the whole thing. While her father, who has understood everything before we understood everything, slips into her bed, the father, to make sure that no one uses the bed for. So the PCA and society in general, let's say, figured out that it was more acceptable that a father would sleep in his daughter's bed than a husband.
Yeah.
So basically, this is very screwball. And it's the idea that the screwball, not in every movie, of course, but they are outlaws, and they reconfigure marriage the way they want it to be.
To the point where when she at one point gets fed up and calls the police, they all end up kind of communally lying together to the detectives to try to get away with it, you know?
Yes, but she's unmasked. And so she ends up in front of the judge. And so it's and then I would have thought, when I read all the correspondence again, that the end of the movie, because here at the end of the movie is absolutely sensational, would be very much censored, but it was not. But at some point, what is interesting, the last but one sequence, she says to the two men, briefly, we've lost. It's been taken out of our hands.
Yeah, right.
And the judge has decided for our own lives, 1940. So I have only one legal husband, and that's and she names him. And then she says, we have to conform. and then this kind of cutaway, and she leaves with her legal husband, but she throws a handkerchief on the floor with a close-up on the handkerchief, which means, "Please, young man, follow me." And then there's an abrupt cut, and the last sequence is in a nightclub. And to simplify things, because we can't go into all the details, at some point they dance, the three of them together, and that's called a threesome.
And it's pretty shocking to see it end that way, in a way that's production code safe, but you really understand what's going on here, that they're all still totally fine.
So one of the two husbands is less enthusiastic than the other one.
The first husband, right?
Yes,
Fred
but
McMurray,
still, he has to make do with that.
Yeah, he wants to make his wife happy.
Yeah, or himself. And the whole sequence is very long, and it's filmed exactly like a dance number in a musical, with very little cuts. But the camera is zooming on the couple, so it's really a sex act. How shall I say, metaphorized, and that is filmed with a kind of very much a voyeurist approach. And then the final line, Jean Arthur, again, this kind of completely acceptable, perfect, wonderful, all-American lady, says, "We will have to do this often."
Right.
So this is Screwball. This is really these outlaws.
Fantastic. Yeah.
But that film takes it to the extreme, I would say, compared to other ones. But it's very interesting in terms of female characterization, male characterization, and the fact that modern marriage, they are experiencing all sorts of things in the private sphere. Bigamy here is a very, very serious thing, that are carried out into the public sphere for antagonism and or recognition. I don't know how to. Am I clear when I say that it's both provocation and making it legitimate?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It is provocative because we're of what they're implying here, but at the same time, they're saying, that's fine, let's do it.
And we are in 1940.
1940, yeah.
So
pretty wild.
And it's a marvel that the PCA allowed that, even after the film was produced. But it's Jean Arthur, those two actors. She seems to be not even responsible for what she's doing. She's she's got sort of a kind of aerial way of playing. So all that must have counted at the time, and it's so extreme that it doesn't seem even possible.
Yeah. Let's talk about Jack Conway's film Love Crazy, pairing William Powell and Myrna Loy together, who are, of course, fantastic in the Thin Man franchise. But this film is a different one. This is from 1941. Steve and Susan Ireland's fourth wedding anniversary takes a wild turn when a series of misunderstandings leads Susan to believe that Steve is having an affair with the attractive woman downstairs. To win back Susan's affections, Steve pretends to be insane, leading to a madcap series of events that involve a straitjacket, a cross-dressing disguise, and a rooftop chase. William Powell and Myrna Loy reunite in this uproarious screwball comedy that showcases their impeccable comedic timing and on-screen chemistry. You were talking about the playing crazy a few movies ago. This is definitely a big part of this one, as that's kind of what Steve ends up doing through a lot of this, is posing as crazy in order to get through these situations, but it keeps getting worse and worse and worse as eventually he ends up in an institution, and then when he escapes, they say that he's a homicidal maniac, and now all the police are after him. And that leads, of course, to the fantastic bit where he puts on the disguise of the woman's outfit and poses as his own sister. This was a lot of fun. I had so much fun with this. I already am a big fan of the Thin Man films, and to see Powell and Loy reunite in this way was just a blast. Where's this one stand for you?
It's MGM. So I thought it was interesting to talk about an MGM film. MGM is not a comedy studio at that time, but still, they had some cycles and solutions, and the couple here is one of them. Then there is this kind of screwball / murder mystery investigation brand that they represent, and it's like not typecasting, but extending this conversation between the film and the audience in taking them into another context, but still with a very eccentric male lead, and the white clown being played by the woman. So that's also why I picked it up, and for the cross-dressing. Craziness and cross-dressing, because it tells a lot about the reflection, the representation of masculine anxieties, like we say today, already at that time. And that's something typically American. It's typical of the American humor in comic books, the Thurber drawings, the cartoons. So it's very much one of the how shall I say, essential elements of components of screwball comedy.
Yeah.
And there's a quid pro quo here, because he's not cheating on his wife. But then it leads to this kind of completely slapstick film. And there's a lot of slapstick that is carried on by William Powell.
Yeah, right.
It starts with the elevator scene when he's stuck in the elevator. And there is this lovely picture book published by Ed Sykoff a few decades ago about screwball comedy with lovely, lovely pictures. I don't know if it's still available. And he has this full page dedicated to that particular scene when he's stuck mid floor and with a dog
with his
teasing
head
him,
pinched between the doors. Yeah.
So it's all about transitioning from a classic male role or character or state of mind into something that is closer to his wife. So again, I'm not sure that at that time we would have said that about the movie, but what is interesting is that at some point he tries to appear as crazy, not to divorce his wife. She wants a divorce, so he's put into an asylum. He evades from the asylum. He is helped by his former girlfriend, the one that is suspected to be his mistress. And while he's with her in the same building as his own apartment, he dresses as his own sister, this kind of unbelievable drag act. And especially
shaving off his mustache,
Yes. And so he's lost all the masculine attributes, the mustache, like you said, the hat. Yep. There's a screwball, very slapstick kind of scene before with the hats. And then he has this huge bosom, lovely bosom.
Yep. Big balls of yarn, which plays into a fantastic gag with a record player.
Exactly. And then society, the evil ones, the police, are circling around the building because they want to put him back into the asylum. So it's again modern marriage, modern couple versus society versus let's say the established order. And he's with his wife, and there is this gag when because he makes a mistake with a gesture, then he's got two fake bosom, and the what's the word? I forgot how you say that, the wool.
The yarn, like
the yarns,
it unspools, it unrolls.
Yes, unravel.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, because of this failing anatomy, and it's as if he was naked, his wife, who was his enemy, becomes his ally.
Yeah.
And they regroup, and I'm not talking about the end of the sex difference, but they are on a common ground.
Yeah.
And that's very, 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 I mean, it's MGM. It's very bold. It's very, very cheeky. And of course, everything is well that will end well. But I find this combination, it's very much a screwball comedy with a very strong slapstick inflection. I would say much more than Midnight. I don't know if you agree with that.
Oh yeah, this one very like a lot of those slapstick antics. I think, I mean, you get the playing crazy in that one, but I think it plays more as kind of character beats as everything. Like when they're imagining, when she tells the group that he's crazy, we just have to go along with him, and so he's saying, I'm a taxi driver. Oh, okay, sure. Like it's more of that kind of comedy in the dialogue and everything, where here you end up with a lot of just the slapstick comedy beats as he's trying to escape from the asylum, and he's hanging the head of the asylum in the tree, using it as an example of how you get out that he can escape. Right?
Yes.
Like you're getting all of these physical gags. And I think that's what this film really plays with and does exceptionally.
And the momentum, I mean, script wise, it's excellent, because sometimes they have a sort of a dull moment in the middle, or the end is a little bit tedious. But here, I mean, it escalates, it rises up until this last momentum with the unraveling bosom scene. And yes, cross-dressing, masculine transition, new mores, new times, gender equalization as well, but very funny. No moral. That's what is so refreshing with screwball comedy. There is no heavy societal message.
Yeah.
Everyone is trying to do as much as one can, as you can. It's difficult. You're not a single block like that. You can evolve into so many emotions and social roles, and that's allowed and recognized on the screen, I would say.
It's a lot of fun. I just really loved it. Let's talk about our last film here. This is Alfred Hitchcock's 1941 film, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Anne and David Smith, a happily married couple, discover that their marriage is not legally valid due to a bureaucratic error. Given the opportunity to reassess their relationship, David decides to take advantage of the situation and proposes a trial separation, much to Anne's dismay. As the couple navigates their newfound single status and the complications that arise from their separation, they find themselves questioning the nature of love and commitment. Carol Lombard and Robert Montgomery star in this charming screwball comedy, a rare foray into the genre by the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. We're getting this, you have this conversation early on when, there's this sense of their relationship painted from the beginning of the film. We start the film, we don't know it, but they're basically mid-fight, refusing to, they won't leave the room until they reconcile their differences. It's been 3 days now. His job is sending, a courier to get him to sign documents and stuff because he just won't leave the room. They finally reconcile. We're getting this sense of kind of the craziness of this relationship between the two of them. And then, of course, once they reconcile, as they're eating, she asks him, if you had it to do all over again, would you marry me? He's like, no, I guess not. And that kind of sets things off in her mind of like, wait a minute. And then, of course, you have this whole thing where there's this error and they're not legally married. And then the decision, like, should they marry or not? And how that leads to kind of this antagonism between the two of them over the rest of the film. It was fun to see Alfred Hitchcock jumping into something that feels very different for him. It doesn't necessarily feel like a Hitchcock film, but maybe that's just because it's just such a different style. Although Hitchcock can be very funny, and I think there's a lot of humor you see in his films throughout his his run, and including using sexual innuendo when necessary. But yeah, what is it about this one that you had why you had included it on the list?
And it's a happy accident that it comes last, because it's a sort of summary of the reinvention of marriage by the Screwball couple. Yeah. And it's almost unbelievable the way it is so vocal in the movie and so precisely stated. But just before we get into that, a little background about that movie. It was Hitchcock's first American movie.
Yeah, right.
And as far as...
Wait, he did Rebecca first, right? Rebecca was the year before this, right?
Wasn't it a British film?
I thought Rebecca was his first with Selznick, right? I'm not going to commit to that, but my head was saying that it was Rebecca.
Well, we need to check or ask our friends, our listeners to send us emergency messages. But so let's say it was one of his first Hollywood movies, and the studio RKO used for the very first time in the Hollywood history some qualitative pretest focus groups, because they wanted first time. Yeah. That's Leo Handel, who was did a groundbreaking research on the beginning of marketing in Hollywood, and they would have their sneak previews with cards, and people would choose the ending that they prefer, just like Casablanca or other movies. Here it's a bit different. The marketing did the research, and they had focus groups, and they wanted to gauge if putting the name of Hitchcock's name on all the promotion would be a plus for the movie, because he was very famous.
Yeah, right.
And they wanted to assess that. So that's one detail. It's quite interesting because craft. How can I say that? Making moving is a lot of craft, but it's also marketing, and it's a time when it's a pivotal moment. And also, Hitchcock was said to be so horrible during the shooting that Carole Lombard had a bull delivered to his place, to his caravan. I don't know, because she was so that's
oh my goodness.
Because I don't think that Hitchcock was very nice with his women with his actresses. And then Carole Lombard in the movie, it's one of her last movies. I think it's the one before To Be or Not to Be, the Lubitsch movie. Right. And she's considered as a typical screwball heroine. I personally find her very, very much close to the kind of super slapstick, clownish kind of actress, as opposed to Jean Arthur or Irene Dunne or others. But she's really, how shall I say, taking the movie into the screwball field, let's say.
Yeah.
And so the idea, what is interesting is, of course, like you said, the movie starts with a terrible scene underway, and the bedroom is a battlefield.
Yeah.
It's a battlefield because it's a place not only where you make love, and they have to make love obviously several times before they allow one another to get out of the room. That's called makeup in bed. But also they've been eating there for days, and the servants were not allowed to clear the room, and also they must have thrown lots of things at each other's.
It's a disaster,
so
right?
It's a beast thing. And that's what Screwball is about. It's about fighting with each other and fighting physically. That's what happens. And Carol Lombard, some sort of established this kind of narrative trope in 20th century, because she's fighting all the time with her impresario John Barrymore. So that's one thing. But then it becomes more cerebral, more theoretical, because she's the one who finally decides that she will accept to go back to her husband, who has changed his mind in terms of let's have this kind of trial apart, because she says that not only he has to propose again and let her know that he's still in love with her, but he has to reenact the constitution of the marriage. And they have a private constitution with 7, 8, or 9 rules that they have.
Right.
And they have to check that every month. And this is going to be reiterated for the rest of their conjugal life. And then when you watch that, when you listen to that, you're just thinking, okay, but there's a prenuptial, there are rules. That should suffice. No. This is Screwball marriage. Marriage is not a public thing. It's redefined. It's an intimate matter, and it has to be redefined by the partners. And that's the model, and that Cavell insisted a lot on that. And of course, it's very funny, and she seems completely crazy, but he will comply with her demands. And in fact, when you look back at all those couples, they have no kids.
No.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
So, and the whole thing is about, to make it a simple thing, to get along with one another, to accept the other, to discuss that, and to come up with terms acceptable for both, be it a reconciliation kind of story or a first encounter story. And then the idea is that you have to renegotiate all that, and this is going to take the place of a formal union. And in that private contract, the couple and the family is no longer defined by the kids. It's defined by the partners being together. And this is exactly what is modern marriage today. In France, we had that debate, a heated debate about the same-sex marriage a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the legal approach to understand how the law would change the definition of marriage, and it's the same in the US, is that marriage is no longer defined by the presence of a child, and so paternity,
right.
but by two partners legally bound.
Yeah.
And then the children, whoever are those partners, from where they are, same-sex, woman and man, and then the children will be an addition to the unit, let's say.
Right.
And so we're in 1940. We are in 1941 here, and I think it certainly was completely overlooked at that time. So it can be considered as something like female emancipation, women's emancipation, gender equalization for sure. But there's something stronger that is already, how shall I say, at work in those comedies. Because otherwise, there's no reason why there are no children.
Yeah, it is setting up an interesting look at what is a relationship outside of what you would traditionally have seen as a relationship based on, I guess, religious views as far as relationship, and that the man was the center of the relationship and the woman was somebody who just took care of things, had the kids, took care of the house, all of that. But it was really like a man's world. And this genre, I think, certainly allowed for that shift. And you see that in, as you're saying, in this comedy of this essentially remarriage that we're getting here, in the words of Cavell.
And that changed after the war, because after the war, the context was different.
Goes back to a different,
And
right.
it's the American dream again, and in some very in a classic way. There is this movie with Myrna Loy and Cary Grant, Mr. Blanding's Dream House, for instance.
Builds a dream house,
Yeah, they have to go through an awful lot of issues and problems and things, but the family is there, the two kids. I mean, it's like in my English textbooks when I was in secondary school decades ago. It's very much a sort of very classical representation again. These 12 years were really interesting in setting up some rom-com standards, and some of them were, and that's understandable, certainly overlooked. Because they really pushed the limit rather far. If you think of bigamy as a public matter and something acceptable, promoted by a high middle class lady, and marriage being something that is only for the purpose of being happy together, and that's it. In Mr. and Mrs. Smith is something very, very, very strong, intense, we would say today.
Well, and it speaks to the nature of this particular subgenre and how it really kind of changed things. And then also how, and Wes and I certainly had a lengthy conversation about the longevity of screwball comedy. And even though a lot of people look at it as like it ends when the war starts, and you can see that, but at the same time, you can see all of the screwball elements and how they kind of continue through the decades and through to today. But you can definitely see, as we're talking about here, how the war really kind of shifted the viewpoint of the marriage and relationships and screwball comedies, romantic comedies, and how it's funny because the production code was in place through all of this period with screwball comedies, but screwball comedies really pushed the bounds so much more than would happen once the war starts.
Because of that particular style, the innuendo, the way of playing, play on words, play on word with images, and but I'm very struck by the fact that over the past, let's say, 5 years, with the shift of movie consumption from theaters, unfortunately, to streaming and our homes. So I'm checking as much as I can some recent rom-coms, and you can't say that this or that is a screwball comedy, because that would be, I think, a bit irrelevant. We're not at the same period in the same context, but everybody makes reference to screwball comedy. And there was on Prime, there was this romantic comedy called Red, White, and Royal Blue, completely unlikely. And one of I attended a panel in Los Angeles this year, and one of the secondary actresses, I think she's called Sarah Shai or something, she plays the president's assistant. And when she was asked how she got prepared for her role, she said, and she's what, 35? And she said, well, I watched a lot of screwball comedies, because that was a screwball role. So it was a kind of semi-professional gathering or panel, but still, it's in the culture, it's in the influence, and the other example is, and I'm not talking about masterpieces, of course, but there was on Netflix 4 or 5 years ago a movie called Love Guaranteed, and I mentioned that in the book. And the ending is unbelievable. It ends in court, of course. I think the lawyers at some point, I don't remember whose lawyer it is, but she asks the guy to publicly propose to her client, And then they exit the court, and they're all together on the steps. And there's a reporter from a TV station commenting on the event and asking them to comment on this public reconciliation and happy event. So
it's right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And depending on the periods, in the 1980s, it was a rather conservative kind of state of mind for Hollywood, maybe after the 70s, and the screwball style was certainly more stifled.
Yeah,
I'd say.
Well, regardless, it is a lot of fun. It's such a fun subgenre to explore. The films are a blast. This was a great list of films to discuss and watch. Grégoire, thank you so much for joining me here for this special bonus episode. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Lovely conversation.
Absolutely. As far as where people should track you down and the your books and everything, do you want to just give a few quick plugs?
Like what?
Like what's the name of your book? Where should people can go check it out on Amazon?
Thanks. The book is, it's on Amazon. The book is called Hollywood Screwball Comedy, 1934-1943. So here we have dates. Sex, Love, and Democratic Ideals. And the publisher is Bloomsbury.
Excellent.
And you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to ask questions also.
Perfect. I'll have links for everything in the show notes, and people can check those out from there.
A big thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much. Next month, we'll embark on a laughter-filled journey through the ever-evolving landscape of the comedy genre. From the silent era's slapstick antics to the biting satire of modern times, we'll explore how comedy has masterfully tapped into the zeitgeist of every era, reflecting the hopes, fears, and absurdities of each generation. Join us as we examine how the humor of yesteryear can sometimes feel dated to modern audiences, revealing the changing values and sensibilities of our society, while also uncovering the secret to comedy's enduring power, its ability to unite people across generations, cultures, and walks of life. Thanks for joining us on CinemaScope, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. Music by Orcus, Randy Sharp, and IBY. Find us in the entire Next Reel family of film podcasts at truestory.fm. Follow us on social media at The Next Reel, and please rate and review us if your podcast app allows. As we part ways, remember, your cinematic journey never ends. Stay curious.